Welcome back to Growing Together podcast. This is Cole Lester, pastor at Central Pres. I'm here with Mike Farley as well. Hi, Mike.
Hey, great to be back.
Man, if I call you Mark, I'm going to feel so bad. I keep doing it. Anyways, moving on. So we are together again. This week, we are kind of walking into a conversation about the inner life of the disciple, meaning being able to kind of discern and understand what's going on inside of us. I think the word integration really helps here, because I think in disintegration, we understand that we are not where we should be, and so we are seeking integration. And what's interesting is one author talks about is in regards to like shalom, where we are seeking shalom even in our own bodies and who we are, our own minds. And so we're walking through that together, and just another conversation that moves us into the direction of talking about what does wholeness look like in our lives, that our lives are not just about what we do, making a decision for when we die or where we're going to go, but it's also living that out in the midst of a world, personally and individually and with and communally. So, which we will talk about in coming weeks next week will be community and belonging. But this week we have the inner life, and I want to read a quote, and then we'll talk about it. From Jamie Smith from a book called "You Are What You Love." I can put a link in the show notes for this as well. But the quote goes this way. It says, "Discipleship, we might say, is a way to curate your heart to be attentive and intentional about what you love." Mike, when you hear that quote, what are your thoughts? We asked it in Sunday school the week that we did this, and we asked this question, and it was there were some. It's one of those questions where we're like, well, yeah, sure. But the ramifications of this reality of what we love, the bigness of our love, what do you hear? How do you respond and think through that?
Well, yeah, because that quote is, deriving from what Jesus says are the two most important priorities in all of life, which is to love God and to love our neighbor.
Yeah.
That all of God's purpose and design of us basically reduces to those two things. We are created fundamentally to love God and to love other people, in all the ways that works out. So the impact of sin means that our ability to do those things is deeply corrupted and distorted. And so if we are creatures who are made to love and driven by love, that means we have to pay attention to what we love,
Right.
Because when being sinners doesn't mean that dynamic of love goes away. It means that it just gets redirected to other things in all kinds of distorted ways. So sin works its way out as we love things in ways that we shouldn't. We try to elevate created things into God's place and love them more than God. We try to love ourselves more than God. We try to love ourselves more than other people. In ways that we shouldn't. It's much of sin results from the distortion of our loves, the misdirection of our loves, and so for God to reshape us back towards health, back towards the way He actually designed us to live, means coming to terms with this dynamic within us. What's really driving our love? What's really driving the desires that are inclining us to want to act and to want to choose the things we choose. Yeah, that's very much at the core of the heart, and therefore it's at the core of discipleship, of actually following Jesus faithfully.
Yeah, I can't help but think of Jesus doesn't ever answer, or he rarely answers a question with the answer I think that we want, right? Like he'll give a story, or he'll give a redirect, or a what seemingly retelling of something that's actually the original intent or meaning. And I think of how he interacted with the Sermon on the Mount, and he goes, yeah, you think this is bad. Let me tell you what more it does, what it shows you more about who you are, what you long for, and what you love. I think of the parables of various things, or like Peter's interactions where he's kind of exposed as somebody who longs for safety and control rather than trust and obedience, and things like that. It's always something underneath what's happening in our lives. There's always more to the story than just what's right there. So you can look at something and say, I'm really mad or I'm really frustrated, and the point is, or the direction now is asked, why? Why am I mad? Why am I frustrated? Being attentive to my own emotions, my own feelings, not necessarily being run by them, but they're kind of a barometer. Like they're understanding, like almost like the meter of where our love exists. It gives us a sense of where we are, and we have to be intentional. Or he uses the word curate, which I think is cool too. Curate or cultivate, all the cool words that exist about things. But it gives us the understanding of like gardening. Gardening is slow, but it's intentional. Curating works of art is slow, but it's intentional.
Yeah.
And so we are, if we are God's masterpiece, or if we are all of these things, it shouldn't surprise us that we are to also be slow.
Yeah, and this need to be attentive and intentional. It really it brings us back to the very basic ways that we're designed in God's image. To go a little philosophical for a minute, it's the key, some of the key things that distinguish us as human beings from every other created thing that God made in the world is that we have minds that can think and reason, and we have a will that desires, that is created to desire what is good,
Yeah.
and to move toward it, out of a desire for what's good. So we have the capacity to think and determine what's true, and to be guided by what is true and the good, by thinking and then choosing appropriately in light of what's true and good. That so you know that means that we, if we are actually functioning as healthy, whole human beings, we will have minds that are functioning appropriately in seeing and discerning what's good and true, and we have a will and in other words, or to use the biblical term, a heart that is being governed by desires for what's good. And so that means that there's no way for us to escape the need to determine what are we thinking and what are we feeling and what are we desiring, because that's at the core of what it means to actually be a human being.
Right.
Because if we're not actually being attentive, I mean, what's the alternative? If we're not being attentive to what we're thinking and feeling and desiring, then we're actually just being controlled by things going on inside of us and ways that we're being affected by things happening outside of us, and in ways that leave us not really fully in control of ourselves. We're sort of at the mercy of all the feelings swirling around us and all the desires and competing messages that we're immersed in. So we either learn to be attentive to what's happening in us, or we're at the mercy of forces beyond us. And the latter is not a healthy or good thing at all, because it leads to a life that just becomes impossible. We're immersed in too many competing and dangerous and evil forces around us, and within us. So we've got to learn to ask, what's happening in me? Where's all this coming from?
Well, and it's overwhelming. I mean, there's a reality that we have in front of us. We have more of a buffet of like options for the way the life should be led and lived, and the way in which we should see the world, potentially than any other culture ever, due to our internet and all of the kind of the global more understanding of global than we've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, even in the midst of that, we're still asking the same questions we've always asked, right? Who am I? Where do I belong? What am I here for? And we have so many people or so many things out there trying to tell us exactly what those, or to answer those questions exactly. But I can't help but think that Jesus, when he answers those questions, he tells it in a story. He tells it in an imagery that keeps us longing and thirsting for the kingdom of God, something more. I mean, I think that's what Jamie Smith continues with, saying that so discipleship is more a matter of hungering and thirsting than knowing and believing. Jesus' command to follow him is a command to align our loves and longings with his, to want what God wants, to desire what God desires, and to hunger and thirst after God, and to crave a world where he is all in all, a vision encapsulated by the shorthand, the kingdom of God. And I think that we're not only is probably, people always say there's like a heart or a God-shaped hole in our heart. I'm like, yes, but I also think that there is a God's kingdom-shaped longing in our heart, a hole that only God and his kingdom and the kingdom values and the work they can fill. And the reality is that we can't do that alone. I mean, over and over in Scripture, you have, like, I think of Peter and Paul, and Paul having to address Peter's kind of cultural bias and his understanding of Jews and Gentiles eating together, and he's having to be like, "Hey, bud, let us remember what Jesus taught us in this." And da, 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 da. But they're sharpening each other in the midst of that. They're saying, "Hey, you're out of alignment with what view of this looks like," or Timothy and Paul, or Timothy and whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
There's constant stories of that where people are picking other people up again. And we just have story after story of disciples going here and there, and they have to be supported in some way.
Yep. Yeah, sometimes we often don't understand ourselves, and we need other people to draw us out.
Yeah.
To ask us the questions maybe that we can't formulate for ourselves, or to give us examples that we can learn from. Yeah, we need to be drawn out.
Well, and this is where like pastors are good. Come talk to pastors, have conversations with them. This is why community is super good. And this is why at times therapy is good. Or not all the time, depending on who you talk to. Understanding ourselves and having the humility to know that our brains might not be where they need to be in the way in which we think through things. We might be battling other things that are forces or brokenness that we cannot do alone, and we need help. And there's a freedom to do that, and there's a freedom and a category for that in the kingdom of God, I believe. And so, of what it looks like to be whole.
Yeah, it's fascinating that there are historians who think that it's actually the Christian tradition that gave human civilizations, in a sense, a deeper capacity to do introspection, like to actually focus attention upon the inner life, like in a deeper way. A lot of people credit Augustine, his work Confessions, as being an important advance in like just human culture and generally, because there's almost no other work like it in the ancient world. You have an entire book that's sort of Augustine's spiritual autobiography. It's him in dialogue with God, talking about how God has not only brought him to faith, but sort of done the work of reshaping his own life, his own character, his own thought, his own desires in this very open way. Lots of people, or historians, who will point to that book and say, this marks something new, in human literature and human reflection, and a capacity to take the inner life, really seriously and deeply. It's why, Augustine, one of his famous quotes from that book, he asks this question: how can you draw close to God when you are far from your own self? Because the whole point of the book is, I'm only coming to know God more deeply as I'm coming to understand my own self more deeply. Because when I do that, it doesn't turn me away from God. If I'm knowing myself truly in light of what's true and good, then it's actually exposing my need for God and my longings. I mean, the theologian John Calvin says the same thing. He opens his master work of theology, the Institutes of the Christian Religion, with this line: nearly all wisdom that we possess, nearly all the wisdom we possess, that is to say, true and sound wisdom, consists of two parts: the knowledge of God and of ourselves. And his point is that those are always inextricable, that the more you know God, the more it will reveal who we are, who we're meant to be, and how we fall short of that. But the more we know ourselves, the more it makes us realize all the ways that we have needs that can't actually be supplied by anything other than God, any person other than God. So wherever your starting point is, if you're actually understanding God and ourselves truly, it will drive us into a relationship with God and ourselves. That they're always inextricable.
Was it Augustine's quotes like, our hearts will never find or always be restless until they find their rest in God?
Yes. Our hearts are always restless until they rest in Him.
Yeah. Yeah, there is and it's interesting. I think the pushback sometimes that, I don't know if it's just modern understanding or what, how the church interacts with modern, because it's kind of more reactionary towards different things. But there is this like mentality of don't worry about yourself, just go do the stuff that you're supposed to do. And it's interesting to me that I think we're probably reaping some of that now, of like how that we don't have the full integrated understanding of who we are. And we're having folks asking questions about, okay, I did all this stuff, but I still feel this way. I did all the good stuff. I did all the Christian, like I went on mission trips. I did this, I did that. And they're still coming back and they're going, but I still have this anger, or I still have this lust, or I still have this concern. I have these things. And not knowing that they could, like, those are the things that are needing to be submitted and into the light with Him. And I think we do ourselves an injustice by not slowing down for that, because everything is so fast paced in our world that even when I ask folks, or when I am encouraging counseling or encouraging spiritual direction or encouraging these things, the first answer is like, I don't know if I have time. And like that has to be an answer that we ask, or a question that we ask way way later, because if I don't have time, or if the question is, or I just don't have the time, or do I have the time, you're going to be ruled by that. You're going to be ruled by that understanding instead of being ruled by who am I becoming, in light of like, how do I make best use of my time, instead of being like, I'm running out of it. And I think we need to learn how to slow down a little bit, maybe put down some things, just to breathe, to think through like, all right, what is I'm being shaped by this, because it's tempting. I mean, that's the reality of the idols of our world. They're idols for a reason, because there are longings in them that we want and desire. We just want them faster, maybe. Like in many ways, I want this faster than what it would take to understand what's inside of me and what God can provide, etc.
That's right. If at some point it just comes down to a matter of priorities.
Yeah.
If the whole point of life is ultimately to love God and to love people, and if there are things in my life, dynamics happening in my life that are keeping me from those things, then everything needs to be things need to be reoriented. We can't just continue in the paths that we're in just because we're in them, and they're comfortable or easy. It's nothing is more important than being rightly reoriented to God and to other people.
Well, I keep thinking about like the business world will talk about work-life balance, right? And still then tell people to work 97,000 hours a
Right.
week, right?
Right.
I think I saw a stat the other day about the average of like we work more than we ever have, like many hours that we ever have, and yet we and in doing so we sacrifice the very things we need, like friendships and belonging and all this stuff, and uh, and yet we're so isolated in the midst of it, and the thing about work-life balance is I think that's a hungering and a thirsting for something, for a wholeness that is just missing it a tad, right? Like there's, if we're talking about vocation and all of life realities, it should be more spiritual as much as anything else.
Yeah.
It should start with the fueling, being at the fueling spot that then trickles down to the rest of it.
Yeah.
Do you have time for abundant life and work, and then like how are you making it to where you live,
Yeah.
into the truth and the promise of abundant life within Jesus?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's not just a call to do more
Right.
in an activity sense. Like you were saying, like it is possible to like do all the Christian things and not really have it touch your inner life in the way it needs to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm teaching this class right now, a foundation Sunday school class called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, where we're using a video series from the author Peter Scazzaro, and like he opens the whole thing by talking about how he almost basically ruined his whole life because he didn't attend to these things. I mean, he had planted a church in New York City and it was flourishing. I mean, they were growing like gangbusters. He was doing all the things that you need to do that. He's teaching classes and counseling people and preaching and sharing his faith and like the church outwardly looks like it's amazingly succeeded, and yet his own inner life and his own way of relating to people was governed by simply the patterns he'd grown up with,
Yeah.
like all the patterns and sinful patterns of his own family history, his own just ways he learned to do things that were really not very much shaped by Jesus. He just openly confesses like his marriage almost ended, because his own way of not dealing with the emotional stress and pressure and his bad ways of sort of using other people and not treating other people well, was causing everything to crash.
Yeah.
And so he's like, yeah, you can do all the things outwardly, and if it will ultimately all fail because if it's not if what you're doing isn't being generated out of a heart that's at rest in God and is actually flowing from a union with Christ that's reshaping us who we are at the core, then there's no way that a set of activities
Yeah.
can ever ultimately go well. They will in the end be distorted by all the ways that our emotional life is broken.
Yeah. Well, I think just have a few questions that we'll walk through, from where we were, but we've kind of touched about this a little bit, but I do think it'd be interesting to think about, what is the goal of the biblical story with regards to people and their relationship to themselves. I don't know if we talk about that a lot, at least like personal, like what are we becoming kind of thing, or what's happening to us. We'll talk about the restoration of all things. We'll talk about heaven or the new heavens and the new earth, and all really great things. Some of our discipleship in the years past have focused solely upon, and just getting people into heaven, and then we'll kind of sift it out in the end or throughout the time. But
somehow it's all just fixed in the end.
Yeah, we'll just figure it out, right? But there is something profound in the biblical story about who we're becoming, and it's something that is, as you go on and on throughout the scriptures, you see these examples of people changing, people becoming more centered in who God is, and understanding. I think, I keep thinking of Jacob is an interesting character to kind of walk through because he's he's just an interesting guy. Um, but like as it goes on, like he starts to learn more about himself and the things in which he does to gain what he wants and all this stuff. And you just watch the character development of this guy throughout. Moses is the same way in some capacity. David is the kind of ultimate example of that in a way. And those stories are compelling. We read them and we go, wow, those are cool stories because those are real people. Like that's how we read it. We should be reading them as real people doing real things, changing in real ways. But seldomly do we think about that kind of in our own lives and be able to be attentive to it and intentional about it. So I would love your thoughts on what is the goal, the biblical story, like what is the goal for people the inner life of the person? It's a huge question, but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. What's your thoughts on that category?
Yeah. Well, it comes, I think it comes back to recognizing that uh, God is wanting to to reshape us into the ways that He's designed us in creation,
Mm.
and that creational design is most fully revealed to us in the person of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He is the human being, the perfect human being, who reveals to us what full humanity is supposed to be. And so, therefore, our discipleship, what God's about, is reforming and reshaping us into the image of Christ. That means that for us that our our character, our our loves are all being reshaped to become the character and the loves of Christ,
Mm.
so that our life is ordered in a way that looks like His. And that necessarily includes a lot about what goes on inside us. It means reshaping what we think is true and good, and therefore it means reshaping what we desire. All the fruit of the Spirit, ultimately are reflections of the character of Christ that He wants to form in us. We need to be people of love and joy and peace and gentleness and kindness and faithfulness and self-control and all those things. Um, you know, we God is wanting to push back against the effects of sin and death wherever the curse is found. And a lot of that curse is inside us.
Mm.
In fact, the origin of moral evil is inside us. It comes from human beings and human choices. And so if that's the origin of human sinfulness, that's where God is going to tackle sin at the root. And that means it has to touch us at the deepest heart level. Um, it it it's there's no real spiritual formation without dealing with sin at its very root, and so it goes into the deepest parts of who we are, how we are thinking and feeling and desiring and hungering.
Mm. Yeah, I can't help but think of it as this whether it be the word sanctification or the words, we talk about union with Christ or any of these things that are that would, doctrinally or theologically speak to give words to what's happening in us and the things like that, and the beauty of and the honesty of going, when you're being reshaped and reformed, molded a bit, it's not just to think of the bad things within you. It's to reshape your brain to see that like God is at work and doing things. There's beauty to be seen as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like your brain is we I don't know. Some of us are probably a little more negative and some of us are more like, depends on where your spectrum of pessimism, critical nature, whatever. But there is a sense that Jesus the Bible does not call us to ignore evil or ignore what's in our lives, the kind of the brokenness in our own hearts and lives, and yet it also does not allow us to be consumed by it, like mind and heart.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus kind of take heart for I have overcome the world, like moving us into an understanding that like Think about these things. Paul in Philippians talks about that, right? What is honorable, true, and noble, and good, and
Yeah.
beautiful, and all the like. Think about these things. We're being shaped even in the midst of broken spaces to see what could be. So, like, even if we're looking at our own lives just as much as we would see our neighbors, we're seeing what we're not only seeing where they are, but what they could be. And I think that's Jesus. Jesus in any interaction that he had as the rabbi to all these apprentices, like he sees what will be and
Mm-hmm.
what could be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think there's like the shattering nature of like even Judas in many ways is the shattering of what could be or could have been, and the overarching or the overwhelming pervasive nature of greed that overtook. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know. So it gives us a really honest glimpse and a hopeful glimpse in the midst of it. It's kind of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the goal is not to just look inside and say, "Oh, it's all bad."
Yeah.
Uh, no, it's actually to try to help us tease out even the things that are bad have some kind of longing for goodness at their core.
Mm.
Even all the things that are most distorted, like every sinful desire we have, is ultimately at its root a longing for something that God created for good
Mm.
that we then twist and distort. All sin is a distortion of something good.
Mm.
So that there's a profound wisdom that comes from being able to recognize that, because that actually then leads us to understand how change can happen. That it isn't just about trying to suppress the bad; it's rather trying to recognize the actual good thing that we're longing for, so that we can cultivate that.
Mm.
You can't fight wrong, sinful desires and hungers and longings just by trying to squelch the bad. You actually have to replace the bad with the good. You
Mm.
have to fight fire with fire in this sense. You have to fight a bad desire with a stronger desire for what's good.
Mm.
That's what I love about that the Christian faith's take on all this is ultimately very positive.
Yeah.
It's not ultimately to say, no, there's bad things in you, make them go away. It's
Mm-hmm.
rather to say, no, stop being satisfied with these distorted things that actually can't satisfy you, when God wants to offer you this so much thing that's so much better.
Yeah.
Here, let me give you the positive, because that's what deep down you really want, even if you don't fully know it,
Yeah.
or even if you can't name it. It's be redirected toward the positive good that God has made for you. And the thing about Christian discipleship that I think is ultimately hopeful is that this is not a mere pious wish that we hope God will do. If the coming of Jesus means that there that the redemption that we need already exists,
Mm.
like there is a perfect human being who already embodies the perfect emotional life, the perfect character, the perfect inner life, the perfection of desires, all oriented rightly towards God and other people. And so our hope is actually found in a real living person.
Mm.
He actually lives and exists. And so this is not just some abstract ideal that we'll never achieve. No, the ideal already exists. He's the living person of Christ. And so there is always hope for us. We might, if as we start to do the hard work of looking within more deeply and trying to untangle what goes on in us, it can feel really hopeless. We might think, there's no way to even understand it, let alone change it. But the reality of Christ actually says no. That not only is God giving you like a set of ideals to measure yourself by, He's saying no. Like the actual ideal, in a sense, that you need is a real person, a real human person to whom you have been joined.
Mm.
And that He has the capacity, therefore, to pour His life into you, to reshape you. He really truly exists, and therefore there is hope, because that hope comes from beyond ourselves. We're not called to change ourselves. We're called to to submit to God's work in it and with us, in this whole process. So there is tremendous, tremendous grounds for hope.
Well, yeah, and so that kind of gets to the second question in a way of if hope is kind of is the framework in there's a reality that there are things in our lives that shape whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. The things that shape us, the things that we watch, the things that we listen to, the people we are surrounded by, the who has our ear, what has our ear, etc. It shapes who we are, and there's like we said earlier, there's so much out there that when we start to talk about these things of attentiveness or intentionality, it can be overwhelming. And so your decisions are either like, I guess I'm gonna either like baptize it into Jesus and try to figure out how I can utilize it. We see that we see just full on buying into the things around you and just being like seeing if maybe Jesus will like it, maybe not. I don't it's more it's quicker, or we just run away from it in general, or we just disassociate entirely and just assume that like it'll what will happen, and we'll just kind of like try to hold on until it all, and which also doesn't give us the abundant life that Jesus calls us to live either.
So what do you think that looks like a little more, sort of more practically? Like, what does it look like when someone does one of those two alternatives, either just kind of surrenders to whatever the influences are around
Yeah.
us, or tries to just run away from them? What does that look like in a person's life, more specifically?
Yeah, I think part of it is I used an example in class I thought was really spoke to it, where I love old school hip hop, and I love hip hop in general. I love the stories that it tells. I love the imagery it gives. I love the struggle that it speaks to, even the hope that it has. And sometimes, what I don't like about it sometimes is the the things it starts to make you think about the world, or people,
Hmm.
the way in which you end up viewing, women, or the way in which you view, or the ways in which people are spoken about, etc. And so I I have to find the medium and the middle ground with that, to some extent. So sometimes people will completely stop. I remember in high school, and this is no shade to my people. This is just how we were processing life. And I remember the Eminem album came out, and I'm like, this is the best thing ever. I became a Christian, and they were like, throw your Eminem album away. And I was like, oh, man, yeah, I guess that's Christian to do, right? Like, I'll do that. And then I bought it like a week later again, because I was like, I just like it. I want to listen to it. Instead of being taught, like, okay, like discern in the midst of it what is helpful, what is not. There are some things that are probably just overall just you just don't need to have it. But and cognitively or like stage wise, maybe a 15-year-old, well, likely a 15, 14, 13, even maybe older kid does not need to have certain things in their lives that they're not ready to discern between, etc. But you have to take the time to do that. You have to take time to think through, like, what is this doing to me? And so your response in doing that is like, like, if you don't want to enact it or go that process, you just kind of ignore it from it, or you just kind of run away from it, or anything like that. And I think for most things in our world, I think Jesus calls us to go through it. Like, it goes to it, towards it, discerning and understanding in the midst of it, because that's also where people are. And so, one of the accusations that sometimes Christians can get is that they're out of touch with all of these things, right? Because the assumption was that we just need to be away from the world, because the world is bad. And but that's also where people are, and that's where life is lived, and that's where justice is needed. That's where hope is needed. That's where love is needed. And so it behooves us to move into and towards it with the understanding of Jesus, but that's with the understanding that dwells within us, or the Spirit dwells within us
Yeah.
in the midst of it. So I think, one of the things in which we do it, if we baptize or buy in fully to things, it can look like, I don't know, not really addressing the problematic things that someone says just because you like them, or you like to listen to them,
Mm-hmm.
or you think that they're helpful. You listen to your favorite influencer, your favorite podcaster, and you're like, yeah, they're just that's just who they are. They're just being themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you don't name the fact that, like, them just being themselves is also shaping you
Mm-hmm.
and them and those who they listen to. I always think of, there are podcasters out there, I'm not gonna name them because it's not fair or fun, and I don't know them personally, but there's kind of this movement of certain podcasters who think that I'm just asking questions, I'm just asking questions, and assuming that the even of the asking of the question is not a formative thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because by questioning something, you are automatically saying something needs to be questioned. And so we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of that, the fact that, like, what I listen to is, or read, or whatever gets my attention, can and will start shaping me if I don't have a filter for it or a discernment for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, that might mean in wisdom you might just not be able to watch certain things. You might not be able to listen to certain people. Something might make you super angry all the time, and you don't want to be that way. So find something else. I mean, like, for me, like, news is like that. I cannot watch news sources because they're just like, I don't understand it half the time now. It's just so angry, or so this or so that. But there are organizations, or like groups who have started to try to synthesize that and give you, like, bite-sized understandings of what's going on with the world. Because I'm not saying be aloof or, like, run away from it or all of those things. What I am saying is be attentive and aware and intentional about what you consume about the world, trying to discern and find truth where it is. It's slow, though, and it's hard, and it takes work, and it takes time. But the alternative is more scary, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The alternative is a life filled with fear or worry, a life that is shaping us into a people of pride or greed or whatever that would exist. The very things that Colossians tells us to put away.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's my thought. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? What have you seen or know, or how would you explain our reactions to the things that shape us?
Yeah, yeah. Another example I was thinking of, practically, in terms of either sort of baptizing,
Mm-hmm.
a sinful way of acting just by going along with it, or by trying to run away from it, is often how we deal with, like, anger and conflict. So, one way of trying to deal with the conflicts that exist in our lives, and the our own anger that can contribute to those. One of which one way of responding to that would be to just give in to the anger.
Mm.
Just be angry like the world's angry. Just be caught up in the same kinds of ways the world sinfully reacts to things that make us upset. And many of us have been shaped not just by the world in general, but especially by the families we grew up in,
Mm.
how that was modeled to us, how to handle emotions, around anger and conflict. So one way of doing that is just give in to the anger.
Mm.
I'm hearing a Sith Lord say,
Yeah.
"Give in to your anger."
Into the outrage. Let the outrage move.
Yeah, that truly is the dark side,
Yeah.
to have your life ruled by anger
Mm.
in that way. There is relationships that will crumble and fall again and again and again if you simply let yourself be ruled by your anger.
Well, there's a reason why Jesus describes as murderous.
Yeah,
Like that is
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. On the other hand, trying to stuff all that away because you're so terrified of entering into conflict in any way, even if you're rightly afraid of the damage that can happen from our anger, if the way you respond to that is to try to stuff it all away, never feel it, never pay attention to it, and try to stay a million miles away from it, in a way, that's also being controlled by anger. You're not even allowing yourself to admit what's happening in you and to understand where it comes from.
Yeah.
Because if you're so scared of it that you just have to immediately stuff it away and try to ignore it or cover it up or numb it, that leads us into all kinds of other destructive patterns. It leads us incapable of actually dealing with things we need to deal with. It can actually lead us to the stronger the emotion is, the stronger things we need to like make it go away. It can lead us into addictions. It can lead us into patterns of numbing ourselves or even like deceiving ourselves about who we are and what's happening in us. That's not good either.
No.
So whether we just give in or whether we try to run away, we're actually either of those options is a way of just being controlled by something that wasn't meant to control us. And so yeah, we have to find a third way. We have to find a third way to be able to recognize what's happening in us, so that we're not controlled by things we shouldn't be controlled by, so that we're able to recognize the better ways that God has actually designed us to respond, so that we can pursue that with Him.
Well, especially because if the goal is love, that definition is huge in regards to the biblical story and what it looks like. I mean, even Colossians, when it says to put on all these things, compassionate hearts and humility and kindness and all of this, and kind of akin to the list of the fruit of the Spirit, etc. And it's encapsulated and tied up in a bow with love to some extent, right? It's what undergirds the entirety of that. And that if that's the goal, if your life is shaped by anger or the fear of it, of conflict, or the fear of grief, or all of those things, love is not the goal anymore. It's safety of some kind. Whether you find your safety in the anger, in the outrage, because you found your people, you found your outraged people. This is how tribalism affects us so much, is we end up just finding the people who feel the same way we do, or sort of think the same way we do, and then we find out they don't, and then we have to find somebody else. But there's this sense that we start to section off with people because we're not actually addressing what looks like what's going on inside of us.
Right.
And seeing, like, I think why tribalism can be so destructive is that you have not only can you not see yourself changing, you cannot see your neighbor change either. So they are now the enemy who can no longer be other than your enemy. And
if I need to define myself in opposition to them,
right,
then I need them to be the enemy. I need an enemy out there to sort of explain my life and my who I am. Yeah, that's.
We already have that. Like, that's the thing. It's like if this war is not against flesh and blood, but of the principalities and the evil, spirits of this world, we already have that. We already have the understanding of who those are and what they do.
Yeah.
And we have who we're to be in the person and work and the life of Jesus.
Yeah. Oh man, so much of Jesus's ministry was about trying to redefine who the enemy is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the Romans. It's not the other Jews.
Yeah.
It's not your neighbor. It's sin, death, and Satan.
Yeah.
Those are the true enemies of humanity.
Well, and I think it's so interesting in that Colossians. So we use the Colossians passage in class, but I think it's so interesting that he moves us from idolatry, the things that we once did as idolatry, the things which the wrath of God or the wrath of Christ is coming for. Says, hey, here's some residual effects of who you are. So put away the the anger and the wrath and the malice and the slander and the obscene talk and lying to one another. But then he like course corrects who's a part of you, and he says that you have now put on this new self, which is being renewed after the image of Jesus or its creator. Because here there is not Greek or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian or Scythian or slave, free, but Christ is all and in all.
Mm-hmm.
So the way in which we're shaped and to see the world now is that, the possibility of redemption and reconciliation, the nature of love and beauty is more than we could ever think or imagine.
Mm-hmm.
That Jesus can in fact do more than we ever think or imagine, as Ephesians tells us. That God can do these things. And so, we live now as a people of hope and a people of addressing the brokenness within us
Mm-hmm.
and being attentive to that, but also with the hope of we don't always have to be that way. The grace of God exists even within our own bodies and molecular. We mentioned earlier that I think Justin Whitmell Early says that the grace of God is shown even in the neuroplasticity of our brains. The fact that we can read, like our thoughts can be renewed. We can be repurposed in many ways into a better way. That's hope lived out. And a lot of it is walking in light of that truth and not letting the things that are louder is not always better. And the things that seem faster are not always better. Yeah, I long, even my own heart, I long for the day where I can sit back and go, that seems pretty efficient. I don't know if that's the right answer. I long for a time where I could sit back and do that. Instead, I'm going, efficiency, that seems great. I don't want to feel this one anymore. I don't want to feel this way or do that thing anymore. But to be okay with the slow progress of being shaped and formed.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes practice. It takes creating habits and practices. And so I guess in our final few minutes, I'd love to, if you have any wisdom on, are there any practices, maybe historically or just maybe things that we can do to start to think through this in a better way?
Yeah.
And to maybe even encourage one another. I think growth groups are really helpful for this. At our church, we do these where, 3 or 4 at most, but mainly 3 or 4 people are getting together to be intentional and attentive to one another and the ways in which we live our lives, writing rules of life and all of that. That's important. It's a big step of importance. I think it's an important step that we need to do. But are there any things that we can do now as we're even preparing our minds for that?
Well, some of this is related to how we pray. That our prayer life it needs to lead us into meditation on Scripture that leads us to do this heart level work. That if we are praying with a view towards asking how Scripture is leading us to be thankful, repentant, lamenting, longing and desiring for God to do new things. Those are all the 4 major kinds of prayer: giving thanks and praise, confessing sin, lamenting the pain and brokenness of the world, asking God to do things. If those major biblical categories of prayer are actually guiding us and we're leaning into all 4 of those, then that inevitably leads us to have to ask questions about ourselves at a pretty deep level. And if we're allowing the Lord to speak to us and we're coming to Scripture to allow Him to guide our prayer along those categories, then He's going to speak into that.
Yeah.
He's going to show us what we need to confess. He's going to make us aware that there are things we need to lament that really hurt. There are things that we long for that we really need to ask Him to do. There are things we need to be grateful for, to see the good, to recognize the good. If our prayer is shaped around those fundamental categories, and we're doing that, then it will lead us there.
Yeah.
And this is what biblical prayers model for us. Like the Psalms are modeling self-awareness.
Mm.
They're modeling the attentiveness and the intentionality that Jamie Smith is talking about, because they're giving expression to the deep longings and desires and questions and doubts and wrestlings and struggles of the heart.
Yeah.
That the biblical prayers are modeling that we're supposed to know what's going on in us, and we're supposed to be able to speak that back to God, and allow Him to actually shape our ability to even recognize those things.
That He's okay hearing it as well.
Absolutely.
Like it's a
He
good
can take
thing.
all of it.
Yeah.
And invites all of it. He's eager to invite all. He doesn't hear it reluctantly. He hears it eagerly.
Yeah.
Because He is drawn to wanting to walk with us in the midst of all the mess that is in our own hearts. He is totally comfortable there. Not because He approves of everything that's there, but because He loves us. And He is comfortable and patient to want to enter into everything that's happening within us, so that we, with Him, can begin to recognize all that.
Yeah.
Can begin to recognize the things that control us, the habits, and even the things we don't fully realize that are there, that He needs to be able to step by step, address with us. So some of it's the practices of prayer, how we coming to prayer with all those categories in mind as we pray from Scripture. Having spiritual conversation with other people. And by that, I mean actually conversation that's shaped by those four kinds of things.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a really helpful model to ask, how can our conversation with other Christians be sort of turned in this direction to help us? We can just use those same four categories, like asking other people, what do you need? What are you giving thanks for these days? What are some things that God is showing you that you need to confess, maybe in new ways? What are some broken things in your life that you're really lamenting and hurting over? What do you long for? What do you long to see God do? Like those four major categories, those are great question prompts.
Oh yeah.
Those are great conversation prompts. One thing you could do with a little group of 2 or 3 other people is to just regularly ask those questions.
Yeah.
And to lead into the conversation that unfolds.
Yeah.
That our ability to actually engage with God about those things can be helped by engaging with other Christians about those things.
Well, imagine the friendships that you build in the midst of that, of the vulnerability and the trust and all of those things that kind of come around. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe as an intermediate step, we need to do, some people can find journaling really helpful here. Like maybe we just need to sit with God and actually write those things out for ourselves, in which we're more intentional about needing to put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, to do that for ourselves. And maybe we need a counselor. We want to do everything in this podcast, I think, to hold up counseling as something that's not a necessary evil last resort, but as something that should be a regular part of people's lives. I mean, we do this informally with each other, but there's a role for especially gifted, trained people to help us sit down and really tease out stuff that's harder to get at. There's a role for professional counselors that we should lean into, and just know the church has resources to help support people, even with the finances of this. Just know that we are a church who has the resources and the vision and the desire to see people receive good counseling in a more professional kind of setting. We're here to help people do that. So don't feel reluctant in any way to ask or inquire about that. We want to help you be helped at every level that you need.
Well, and even some of the counseling centers we function or we partner with and we work with, they have the same vision as well. Of creating spaces and places for people and abilities for people to navigate counseling or to be able to get counseling that don't have options. And I think a lot of life is, just imagine the friendships. Imagine the relationships you have and the wholeness that you'll experience being able to ask those questions with one another, the ability to walk through that, and the privilege that it is to be able to do that with others, and like that holding all that pretty tenderly with each other. There's just
Yeah.
something about being known. It's beautiful in that way.
Yeah. Some of that daily prayer of asking God those things, like trying to, sometimes it can be even just come down to the mere structure of our calendar. Like, do you actually just even create enough margin in our days to give ourselves some space to recognize that? Yeah. I did some counseling during my sabbatical a few years ago, and that was one of the chief things that practically that he encouraged me to do was to create enough margin in my schedule, like between meetings, between projects, between things I'm working on, to just give me a little space to even ask how I'm feeling, like what's happening in me,
Yeah.
just throughout the day. Give myself 5 minutes, to just stop, take a breath with God, and just to notice
Yeah.
what's happening, so that I'm not just constantly running from task to task to task,
Yeah.
kind of pushing that stuff away. So just some margin on a daily basis is really important. And there may be even some more longer term rhythms. I go on a retreat once a year with some friends, and one thing that we've been doing for a long time is, in order to help jumpstart our conversations when we're together, we write a kind of written summary of the prior year, in which we have some prompts that we just learn to reflect on some of those kind of questions, like, what are you really giving thanks for this past year? What were hard things you need to lament this past year that you want brothers to know about?
Yeah.
How can we enter in and know what to ask about? So the annual process for me of having, because I'm not a typical like daily journaler. I don't know why. It's never been a practice I've been able to sustain for very long.
Yeah.
But this annual practice of having to think back and write some stuff down, that's been super helpful for me, at remembering things I need to remember, being able to go back and see milestones, see ways that God has worked. But even just forcing me to do the work to articulate and become more aware of things that have happened and how they've impacted me, how they've impacted my wife, my family, my friends,
Yeah.
my church. That's been super helpful. So maybe there are some longer term rhythms. Maybe it's monthly. Maybe it's 2 times a year. Maybe it's something like that, where you just need to give yourself a little time to step back and ask, where am I? What's happened in the last period of time, so that I can begin to recognize not only where I still need to grow, but even ways that I already have grown. It's long, slow work, like you've been saying, and sometimes we need a longer term perspective to be able to say, oh, I'm different than I was a year ago.
Yeah.
And to,
Yeah. You have like
give
some
thanks
sort
for
of
that.
documentation to talk about that.
Yeah.
That things have happened.
Yeah.
I've got right now, one of the things I've been trying to do is have this Bible that has a bunch of blank pages in it, and I'm trying to write it and process different things as I'm reading it, and hopefully with my children will read it one day and be like, oh, Dad was really struggling with some of these things, and I think he's changed, or things like that. And I think that to me is beautiful.
Yeah.
But so there are tons of practices, tons of things that we can do, and the ways in which we can be intentional and attentive. There will be ample time to talk more about that, either in person if you're with us, or you can always email the church and get more information from us or things of that nature. We would love to be able to walk with you through that. It'd be an honor to do so. And so, yeah. So I guess we'll end here. Next week we're going to talk about community, and it's going to have maybe some of the same feel of practices, just as much as anything else. But I would encourage you this week to be able to set aside that like 5 minutes in between things, or set aside some time to go, all right, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? What am I, why am I feeling this way? Or, what am I thankful for? Or just have some framework in your day. Just start small. Start small with the question, just how am I right now? Start small and you'll grow from it. And I think that'd be a challenge for this week, to do that, to walk intentionally in that. But as usual, Mike, thanks for being with us, and thanks for walking alongside us for this as well. And thanks for whoever's listening. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, there's a link in the show notes for that. And we'll link the books, reference, and some things like that as well. But I hope you have a blessed week, and we'll see you again next time.